Hey guys, number one Marmaduke fan here, looking at Usagi Yojimbo, book two. I got one book for my nephew. I decided he's a little too young for these still, but that's all I needed to retake the Usagi pill. So I'm gonna be revisiting all the old books. So book two continues what I love about book one. So I think I want to talk a little bit more about Usagi as a character in this one. So I see Usagi as a paragon type character. There's this dumb idea that heroes have to have gray morality and they have to have crippling evil flaws so that you can identify with them. And that can be true for a specific character, but that becomes dumb when you assume every character has to be that way. The appeal of an aspirational character is not their grappling with their deep, dark, evil secrets that they hide away. It's they work because they're basically good. And so what makes them interesting is seeing the basically good person in this more complex world. And then I guess the other kind of fun thing about Usagi is even though he is very aspirational, he's very good at what he does. He can kill the shit out of people with his sword fighting techniques. He does occasionally goof up or just make like a dumb mistake. So the fact that he is very much the paragon archetype doesn't mean he's not relatable because, I was going to say he's a human being, but he's a rabbit. So the other cool thing about book two is after book one, in the very first short story, we got a glimpse of Usagi's past. And the day he became a Ronin is the saddest and the most important day of his life. And then book two does this really elegant thing where we kind of, we start, it's not exactly in media res. We see a duel, and we don't know, it's all done silent, and we don't know why it's happening. And then Genosuke sees the end of this duel and asks Usagi why he killed that samurai. And then Usagi goes back and he explains the whole story. Nice thing here, by the way, this is one of those things where, it's the classic samurai have their face off, and then it pauses for a second, and then one flops down. There's this really nice detail where the frog barely moves its leg, and then the frog and the lizard run away, which if you were using copy-paste in a computer, you wouldn't get a nice little detail about that. So Stan Sakai loves his craft, and he's very good at his craft. So I'm going to talk about Usagi's backstory, and then I'll talk about the little bonus short stories. So in the first book, we kind of got to see Usagi as a person without knowing his backstory, and you get to know Usagi. He's really capable. He's very good-hearted, and he can do a serious fight, and he can have like a goofy ba-dum-tsh moment. So what's neat is now we're going to go back and see his origin story, and his origin story actually means more to us now that we know who some of these characters from his past are. So it's like we're rewinding in time and getting more context on things we've seen before. So in book one, Usagi's relationship with Kenichi is really important. And Kenichi is the guy who marries the girl Usagi loved as a young teenage guy. This, by the way, I think is drawing from the Samurai trilogy, which is one of the most obvious references. The Samurai trilogy is the story of Miyamoto Musashi. Miyamoto Usagi is a parody on that character. So I don't remember the character's name, but Musashi as a child has a childhood friend, and they're kind of equals and rivals. But then over time, they take different paths in life, and Miyamoto Musashi becomes the greatest swordsman in the world. So it's kind of like the question is, okay, well, if you have two people who start off roughly at the same skill level, similar cultural background, same age, same town, why is it that one becomes a husband and father and one becomes the world's greatest samurai? And it's partially their choices, but B, it's partially their spirit. And even though it's a pregnant point for Usagi later in life that the woman he loved married someone else, and he's kind of feels bittersweet about that, you get the sense that Usagi made the right choice. He wanted to be a samurai ever since he was a little boy, and then he endures a lot of discomfort to get that. So his master is Katsuichi, an old lion, and Katsuichi is kind of like the classic old man of the mountains who's gone off to, he's lived the way of the sword so long, and he just sort of lives a simple life in the woods. And the traditional schools of martial arts all hate his guts because they see him as a walking, talking insult to their way of life. He does the classic thing where he lets Usagi, this is probably right out of the Kung Fu TV series, but he lets Usagi kind of like wait overnight and slowly just gives him a whole bunch of chores to do without teaching him any swordsmanship. And he just starts beating him up. And the point of this is, so Katsuichi is a pretty complex character. So he gives us a few lines that are suggestive. The guys he kills, they make fun of him by saying, "You were kicked out of your school," and he said, "No, I left my school because I was tired of teaching idiots." So there's a suggestion that maybe he doesn't really want to be a teacher that much. He's also hesitant to kill. So before he kills them in self-defense, what he says to the people the swordsmen who attack him is, "Go home, children." So I don't think Katsuichi wants Usagi to be a samurai unless Usagi is really ready for this. Therefore, his method of teaching him is to basically just keep beating Usagi up until Usagi is terrified of him and puts two and two together that he actually has to pay attention to his surroundings. And this gets reinforced again and again. Katsuichi hides behind a tree. Usagi senses him, yells at him, throws some stones, second guesses himself, and then just keeps walking. And then Katsuichi jumps out, bops him over the head again, and calls him a fool and an idiot. So so this is tough. He's yelling at him, he's being mean to him, he's beating him up. But from Katsuichi's perspective, that would have gotten him killed. So in kind of like masculine Bushido culture, and to be a samurai, if you want to be a samurai, you've got to be prepared to get hit. If you want to be a samurai, you can't afford to make these dumb mistakes. And it takes Usagi basically several months to earn the right to even hold a wooden sword. When Katsuichi explains his philosophy, it's great classic, samurai stuff. The sword is the soul of the samurai. But Katsuichi has this additional idea that although the sword is the soul of the samurai, the spirit of the samurai is behind the sword. So spirit would be your breath. Spirit would be your life force. And this is going to be important later because I think this is what makes Usagi Usagi. So Usagi is a skilled swordsman, but what makes him who he is his spirit, not necessarily just his sword play. Although his sword play, the sword being the soul of the samurai, is the expression of his spirit. So, and there's great comedy of Genosuke continually providing color commentary on the story between chapters. One more thing, by the way, is I think both of these characters are in some ways inspired by different versions of Toshiro Mifune's samurai characters. Usagi's the more pure-hearted one. Genosuke's the more rough and tumble Han Solo type from Yojimbo. Another kind of neat point. So the idea of the samurai, one thing I've been thinking about is why is the West so interested in Japan? Why is the West so interested in anime? Because this isn't new. There was an obsession with Japan in Impressionist painters got obsessed with Japan and Japanese prints. I think they called it Japanimania or Japanese in France. So the West has been interested in Japanese culture specifically for a very long time. And one reason I think that is I think Westerners can see a version of ourselves in this world. I can sort of see an image of the Christian knight in a samurai character, even though a samurai character isn't a Christian knight. So Katsuichi does this cool thing where a bunch of punks show up and threaten him, and he offers them his lunch, even though they call him a coward and make fun of him. So he seemingly, so what this is like Christian meekness, but not weakness. He seems very willing to placate. He doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to kill, but when they grab Usagi and threaten to kill him and push comes to shove. This is great. This is great, by the way. So they do the classic thing where they put the piece of fruit on his nose and he tells him, cut the thing in half or I'll kill the kid. Katsuichi draws his sword and he doesn't cut the thing in half. He just kills the guy in one hit, right? So what's kind of neat about that is he gave these guys an out before. There was a way out of this, maybe without killing them, but he didn't risk. He decided not to trust these guys anymore. Once it became push to shove, he killed without hesitation, and the rest run away. Usagi kind of makes the crack that, oh, well, I guess you couldn't cut the piece of fruit off my nose, and then he cuts it too, right? Which means he could have done it the whole time. So he didn't do this because he was afraid he couldn't cut the fruit. He did it because he judged that he had to eliminate this threat. So Katsuichi is a man. He's the mentor figure who teaches Usagi who he has to become. And Usagi faces off against Kenichi at the duel. It's basically like a sword tournament before Lord Mifune to earn a pair of beautiful swords. So although Kenichi is a talented swordsman and a very dedicated swordsman, he makes a mistake. He promises that if I can't defeat Usagi, I'll leave the school in disgrace. So Kenichi kind of blows up his career as a result of that. So the guy we met at the beginning of the story is Gunichi, the boar. And Genoseki is always asking, well, what about that guy? When's he going to show up in the story? So when Gunichi shows up, he gets this really cool introduction where he's kind of cloaked. He speaks of the importance of the sword and how he admires Usagi's swordsmanship. But then Gunichi demonstrates masterful swordsmanship. So he draws his sword, the mosquito lands on it and flies away. He has perfect control. And his criticism of Usagi is that Usagi is unyielding. He's young, he's brilliant, he's skilled, and he's trained, but he's inflexible in his thinking. And then even like his swords are named Willow Branch and Young Willow. So he has to learn the lesson to be as flexible as the willow and not be so unyielding. So earlier we had a contrast between Kenichi and Usagi as a young man. Now, as an adult and a master of his craft, there's a contrast between Usagi and Gunichi may even be a better swordsman than Usagi at just the level of swinging the sword around, right? So what's different about them is their perspective on swordsmanship, and ultimately we'll see their view of honor. So Gunichi teaches Usagi to be more yielding, more fluid in his thinking. And what's kind of fun about this is we actually see this later on when Usagi is a Ronin and more mature. There will be gags where he doesn't like the idea of Genosuke robs Gunichi's body, and Usagi thinks it's bad luck to buy drinks with money taken from a dead man. But then after Genosuke buys him the sake, Usagi takes a drink. I think he says, I'll drink it, but I won't like it. So Usagi has become, he is a very principled person, but he's become a little bit more flexible now that he's a Ronin. Without his master, Usagi now has to, he's free. And so he has a little bit more freedom about, how do you deal with these little ethical dilemmas? He's not as rigorous a person as he once was. I'm going to skip over it. So there's kind of like a whole nice sequence where Kenichi and Usagi join forces again, which is kind of nice because even though they're at each other's throats a lot, they really are good friends. It's a complicated relationship where, I'm pissed off that he's surpassed me, but he's still a good guy, and they're still both pretty hard. They're both strong and capable men. So it's not like Usagi's the Giga Chad and Kenichi is the soy boy. They're both hard. They're both hard Scrabble men. They just made a different choice in life. So Usagi becomes a samurai for Lord Mifune. It's just a direct homage to Toshiro Mifune. And then that leads up to a full sequence showing us the war that we only got hints at before. In the midst of the battle, General Toda turns traitor and Gunichi flees. So Gunichi is a perfect samurai in terms of his swordsmanship, but when push comes to shove, he's a coward, and he would rather flee and preserve his life than die fighting for his lord, which is unthinkable to Usagi. So years later, now we're seeing what caused the hatred. Not exactly the hatred. That's the other interesting thing. So when he kills Gunichi because it's a debt of honor. He doesn't even hate Gunichi when he does it. This is just what he needs to do. And the denouement to all this is that he pays for Gunichi's funeral, and he chooses to think of Gunichi as a friend after killing him. So it is really just Usagi's idea of honor that makes this duel to the death a necessity. So they're both good swordsmanship. They're both top-tier swordsmen. But what separates Usagi from Gunichi is that Usagi would rather die with honor than live without honor. Now, in the end, he does survive the battle, and from that day on, he is Ronin. And Genosuke has the great line, the saddest day of a samurai's life is the day he becomes a Ronin. I'll tell you that story someday. So, really elegant, thoughtful, and complicated view of the relation between two men. And and it kind of gives us a hint of more. So that's that's our backstory for Usagi. I think he really feels like a complete character from this point on. After this backstory, then we get a few short stories. I'll talk about these briefly. Kappa is just a really solid ghost story with a Kappa. These guys show up in Harry Potter. They're the inspiration of Koopas in Super Mario Brothers. I think I'm not sure if this is directly based off of a Japanese fairy tale. I've seen Japanese fairy tales similar to this one, but it's just got a great twist at the end. Zilla, I won't spoil. This is strongly in the category of Usagi silly gag stories, and if I spoil it, it's just going to spoil it for you. So you got to go read that to see what the deal with Zilla is. But I will talk about Silk Fair, because Silk Fair is basically just Stan Sakai saying, man, I love the movie Yojimbo so much, I'm just going to do a little short story that's based on that cool scene from Yojimbo. So Silk Fair is another story where we sort of see who Usagi is by how he acts. So he's, a lot of Ronin were probably running around murdering people and robbing people, but because Usagi is a good guy, we see him, so him doing Paragon stuff, helping out a simple farmer, and then we get this sort of like adorable series of sequences where the farmer, the silk worker, brings him to his home, and he gets to meet his whole goofy family, and the whole goofy family love Usagi. So, meanwhile, the silk merchant is hiring a sort of like braggadocious samurai to guard for him for cheap, and he only works for one ryo a day, and Usagi thinks that's dishonorable because a true samurai knows his worth. So Usagi takes seriously to him, being samurai is everything. So a samurai working for cheap is an insult to all samurai, and we get this contrast of personalities: the braggadocious guy who acts tough versus the guy who really can chop people up so he doesn't have to brag about it. And this leads up to this entire sequence that is straight out of Yojimbo. Go watch Yojimbo. You'll see what I'm talking about. But Usagi climbs up the tower. Excuse me, cough squad. Climbs up the watchtower, and the merchant has to beg him to come work for him when he realizes the other samurai has run off. One more thing, I'll just mention it because this is great. This is stolen straight from Zatoichi movies. Now, I think when Stan Sakai does it, I think he does it as a loving homage. But if you love samurai movies at all, this is just absolutely chock full of great references. So. References to them, but he gets the genre, and because he gets the genre, Usagi is a goofy animal character. He's able to make him believable as the cool sword-fighting Chanbara hero. And then in other episodes, Usagi will just have like a goofy clown episode where it's him and Genosuke one-upping each other. So all-time great series. One of the all-time great samurai characters, and one of the all-time great... It's interesting that one of the all-time great samurai stories came from an American comic creator. Oh, I want to talk about one last thing. So, Marc Evanier writes a very kind of tongue-in-cheek forward to this comic. Marc Evanier was the scripter for Gru the Wanderer, which Stan Sakai worked on as the letterer. And Evanier has some pretty interesting observations. Like, he praises Stan Sakai's camera work, he calls it. He points out that when Stan is pacing a scene, he times very well what scenes he shows and what angles he picks, which I think that's definitely true, right? Like, Sakai's early style is a little stiff, but his camera work and his pacing and his scenery set work and expositional shots are master tier. So Evanier is basically picking up on what his Sakai's strengths are. Stan Lee wrote a pull quote for the book, and I don't know where I saw this. Somewhere I saw that Stan Sakai worked as a letterer for Stan Lee for a while, and that got him like basically his start in the professional comics world. When you think about it, lettering is not the most prestigious. It's not the quarterback job of comics, but he impressed people with his work ethic and lettering, and that turned into opportunities where he created one of the most interesting and long-running independent comics of all time. So I even like respect Sakai as like a person and the stories people tell about him. So excellent series. Go check it out. Number one Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Catch you later.